Welcome to Weird PVD, the podcast. Every week, your host, Sherry Kasperzak, takes you to the odd corners of beautiful Providence, Rhode Island. From big blue bugs to unique art, from weird history to weird food, you'll never look at Rhode Island's creative capital the same again. Tune in every Weird Wednesday. So, riddle me this, PVD weirdos. What do trains, a wild pagan celebration, and urban exploration have in common? Well, let me tell you. It's the East Side Railroad Tunnel. Today, we're chugging it on over to the East Side to explore the abandoned train tunnel that led to accusations of Satanism and a whole lot of curious kittens bypassing efforts to seal off the tunnel for a few thrills. Let's start at the beginning. The tunnels were constructed in the early 1900s because there was no direct train line connecting Providence's Union Station and the railroad lines along the Seekonk River. There had been earlier attempts to run freight cars on trolley tracks from India Point to Union Station, but frequent derailments made this problematic. The East Side Railroad Tunnel was officially opened in November of 1908. The train line ran from Providence to Bristol, Rhode Island, and Fall River, Massachusetts. The passenger line ceased operations in 1938, but freight trains continued to operate on the line until the mid-1970s when the line shut down, except for horse racing track service, but this was discontinued in the late 1960s. Once service officially stopped in the mid-1970s, the Providence and Worcester Railroad took up operation of the line. The P&W used the 1-mile stretch of the East Providence segment of the train line, which could only be accessed on the East Junction or East Providence branches, to run freight lines to a scrapyard until the early 2000s. The line was officially abandoned in 2006. Before the line was abandoned, though, it played host to one of the most infamous and bizarre incidents in the city's history. On May 1st, 1993, a group of students from the Rhode Island School of Design and Brown University gathered at the tunnel for a Beltane/May Day celebration. According to a Providence Journal article dated May 3rd, 1993, the incident began around 1 a.m. when two RISD security officers hailed two city police officers driving by on Benefit Street and asked them to clear partygoers from the tunnel. Two men were arrested inside the tunnel, but an unruly mob on Benefit Street surrounded police cruisers and began rocking them, preventing police from driving away with suspects. A short time later, all of the police officers in the city who were on duty, about 30 in all, were sent to disperse the mob on Benefit Street, just above the entrance to the former Providence and Worcester Railroad Tunnel. Answering the call for help, a group of officers formed at the fire station on North Main at Meeting Street and moved up the hill on Meeting and then north on Benefit, wielding billy clubs and spraying pepper gas. They ordered people to move and shoved and gassed those who showed the slightest resistance, according to eyewitness accounts. Finally, some of the partygoers moved up 1 block to Prospect Park, where police dispersed the crowd. The ensuing violence led to one police officer getting struck in the eye with a large piece of asphalt, according to a police report, and his wound resulted in 68 stitches. It concerns me very much when 7 police officers are injured and 3 police cars are damaged by college students at the expense of taxpayers, said Bernard Gannon, who was the police chief at the time. Police went on to call the gathering satanic, a term that later made the students laugh. Police estimated that about 100 people gathered around a bonfire at the entrance to the tunnel below the blacktop of a Benefit Street parking lot, which was owned by the Providence Art Club. Inside the tunnel, more people gathered around smaller fires. It's reported that about 200 people were involved. Some carried torches. A videotape made by one RISD student showed revelers beating homemade drums. Some wore costumes. Others had oversized papier-mâché masks covering their heads. By about 1 a.m., though, RISD security guards became concerned about the safety of the partygoers. See, the tunnel had no ventilation, and there were quite a few people in the tunnels, leading to concerns about carbon monoxide poisoning. The two RISD guards flagged down the Providence police officers on Benefit Street opposite the Providence Art Club and told them they needed help clearing out the tunnel. Several partygoers said police didn't make it clear why they wanted to break up the party at the time. The cops were trying to persuade people to leave the tunnel, but a few people became stubborn about it. One partygoer was wearing an animalistic mask and beating a drum and was arrested after he refused to stop drumming. There was a video taken of the event, including footage of the drummer resisting a uniformed officer who was trying to take away his drumsticks. I mean, understandable. In the struggle that ensued, the drummer was charged with assault and disorderly conduct. In an interview later, he said he didn't understand why he should stop beating his drum. From there, the violence only escalated. A second person was also arrested inside the tunnel and charged with 2 counts of assault. And police eventually ended up using pepper gas to clear the tunnel. Once the police and security guards left, they saw a hostile crowd of, quote, several hundred people converging around their police cruisers, calling them pigs and swearing at them. According to a police report, the crowd surrounded police cars and began to rock them back and forth, preventing them from leaving. As the police car carrying the 2 students who were arrested moved down Benefit Street, crowds eventually resorted to pelting it with rocks and bottles. A police sergeant who was standing on Benefit Street was hit in the head with a beer bottle, and he tried to get to his cruiser when the rear window of his car was shattered. Here's a Providence Journal editorial from Howard Rigberg, who was a Brown University student attending the celebration at the time. I am a 22-year-old Brown senior who attended the, quote, tunnel party, end quote, in the abandoned East Side train tunnel Saturday night and early Sunday morning. I would like to make a few remarks regarding the events that night and the coverage in the Journal and on the local television news programs. Let me begin by stating that the students in the tunnel were not engaged in a, quote, satanic ritual, nor were they drunken insurgents looking for a fight. The event, as it was conceived, was not about alcohol, drugs, or evil. It was meant to be a celebration of the rites of spring. The students who planned the event spent weeks getting ready and devoted many hours to constructing masks, making large puppets, gathering drums and other materials, and organizing people around the event. Unlike the Thayer Street Art Festival, which ironically occurred on the same weekend, the celebration in the tunnel was not about making money, but rather to give people an opportunity to be creative, to be themselves, and to just have a good time. The fact that the evening ended in a melee had more to do with the incompetence and belligerence of the Providence Police Department than it did with the students' insurrection. I hasten to add that I did not in any way support the hostile actions against the police that occurred. The students who contributed to the escalation of violence should be strongly condemned for their behavior. However, as a crowd of about 300 young people who were enjoying themselves, shouldn't they be expected to act at least a bit responsibly? The police, on the other hand, should be expected to do their job properly. The 2 RISD security guards who first arrived on the scene requested the help of the Providence police because they were concerned about the welfare of the people in the tunnel. The dangers of asphyxiation from smoke inhalation and the possible need for crowd control were perhaps foremost in their minds. The concerns of the RISD security officers as they encountered the students in the tunnel were genuine and legitimate. However, the intentions of the Providence police, as evidenced by their subsequent actions, were not primarily to protect and serve the individuals who had been gathered beneath Benefit Street. One of the facts that has been related to the tunnel incident that has been either unknown or ignored by the media is that there have been 2 other celebrations this year similar to the one last weekend. The first event occurred in October and was similar in many ways to the one last weekend. More than 100 people gathered in the train tunnel wearing masks and playing drums and dancing. The second event occurred in March when about 50 students from Brown and RISD wore costumes, played instruments, and paraded downtown at midnight. There are, however, 4 facts about these previous events that make them very different from the tunnel party last weekend. 1. The police did not intervene in the actions of the revelers. 2. No one got hurt. 3. No property was damaged. 4. The majority of people who attended the festivities had a good time. If the Providence police were genuinely concerned about the safety of the students in the tunnel, wouldn't it have made more sense to attempt to put out the fires that had been lit in the tunnel than to fill it with pepper gas? If the Providence police had wanted to maintain crowd control, wouldn't it have made more sense to begin by calmly leading out those who, as RISD Vice President Fran Gast stated, were ready to cooperate rather than to approach with hostility those who may have expressed some resistance to leaving the tunnel? There were many students, myself included, who began calmly leaving the tunnel when the news arrived that police were on the scene. The actions of the Providence police seemed more geared to provoke the ire of the people who had gathered than dispel the threat of violence and calmly disperse the crowd. Consider the following example of one of many acts of blatant police brutality that night. A friend of mine who lives on Benefit Street was trying to return home after the police had begun to move people out of the tunnel. He was walking opposite to the direction that the police were trying to lead the crowd. A policeman shouted at him, "Turn the expletive around." My friend complied, but when his back was turned to the police officer, he was shoved to the ground. When he tried to stand up again, the policeman struck him in the face with his billy club. Although the journal report on the tunnel melee mentioned the injuries suffered by those students who had been arrested on the scene, no report was made of those who, like my friend, were beaten, shoved, and cut, and verbally abused for no reason at all. The journal article on May 3rd quoted Police Chief Bernard Gannon. "It concerns me very much when 7 police officers are injured and 3 police cars are damaged by college students at the expense of the taxpayers." As a Rhode Island resident and city taxpayer, it concerns me very much when innocent people are injured by police who are supposed to protect them. So that wraps up the celebration that somehow got turned into a satanic ritual in police and media reports. And since the tunnel has been abandoned, it's become a target for urban explorers and the curious. The entrance to the tunnel on the east side is frequently welded shut, only to be broken into again. It typically takes a few months before the city realizes it's time to seal it up again, and the process repeats. Some people who have ventured into the tunnel have useful advice for the curious. Over at the r/Providence Reddit board, Duddy RI writes, "Let me say this as someone who has gone the full length a dozen or so times, be very careful waiting because there are these pits. I basically think they're sewage drains like you'd find under a manhole cover. No idea where they would drain to there. But we found one once and took a long stick and poked it down. It was longer than the 8-foot stick that we had and wider than a person. So if you fall in there, you'd probably have a pretty bad time." And I think we realized that they were somewhat periodic along the length. The Strange New England website took a trip out to explore both the west and east entrances to the tunnel. And here's an account of their trip. The west side of the tunnel was fairly easy to find. It remains hidden in the back of a parking lot behind a building on South Main Street. I chose to approach it from Benefit Street since I was told it was in close proximity to the armory. Though I was aware of its size, I was still stunned by its true magnitude. The entrance was now sealed by a wall of corrugated steel. A small door locked and welded shut adorns its center. There were small holes one could peek into, but nothing could be seen. The east end looked much like the west end. What differed the most is the setting it was situated within. Instead of a clean, empty lot, the landscape was a swampy roadside gully littered with the rusty shells of a car and miscellaneous trash. The car is upside down. Could this be the alleged police car? Question mark. I doubt it, but who knows? Also, the walls of the east end were covered with a variety of impressive graffiti art. Just as on the west end, the wall of steel covering the mouth of the tunnel had a small door. Anything that had previously secured the door had been removed. Peering into the void, I could see nothing. I stepped in a bit more to let my eyes adjust, but to my chagrin, I still saw nothing. Even with the aid of a flashlight, all I could only see within a few feet of my current position. The immense size of the tunnel consumed what little light was allowed in. Struggling to see more, shapes would fade in and out of the distance, most likely caused by the thin veil of mist. I could hear rumbles and thuds echoing in the distance. There is an eternal rainstorm trapped inside the tunnel, a slow drizzle from the moisture dripping from the condensation and cracks in the ceiling. Previous guests of this murky void had positioned metal barrels so that plummeting drops would strike the surface. How frightening it must be for those who explore the tunnel. A constant and quiet trickle interrupted randomly by a loud drumming reverberated by the bore. It would be difficult to tell exactly where it was coming from. With a lack of visibility and misty apparition darting around, even the bravest of adventurers would feel uneasy. Today wouldn't be my day to see if it would live up to my expectations, not just for a lack of light, but also the fact that the tunnel was filled with 6 to 12 inches of water. So, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Weird PVD, the podcast. If you liked this episode, do me a huge favor and please give me a follow, like the video, leave me a comment about your experiences in the East Side Railroad Tunnel. You can also find me on Instagram. I'm at weird_PVD. And thank you as always for your support. It means the world to me. And don't forget to keep PVD weird.